Hello all, James here. Now, over the past few years, Dr. Britt Baker DMD has been one of the lightning rod talents in AEW. A great presence, good charisma, so at the wrestling part, but definitely the face of the AEW women's division since the company's inception. Then a year ago, she ends up disappearing with no explanation. In fact, more than a year ago, in fact. Not unusual for someone to disappear with no explanation in AEW when talent are discouraged from revealing illness and injury. The Keith Lee effect, you might call it. In this case, it was illness. Britt Baker became horribly unwell, including having, of all things, a mini stroke. That put her out of action for nearly a year, cumulative with other stuff. Then, when she returned, Tony Khan's favourite female performer, her position has been sort of, I guess, usurped by Mercedes Moné. And now there are more women over in the company like Toni Storm as well. Coupled with rumours that Britt Baker is a bit of a shitbag behind the scenes. That news has been leaking. The news has been leaking out for years. Recent suspensions and not being heavily featured since her return have led to people believing that Britt Baker is on the outs with AEW. And now a new report by PW Torch's Wade Keller indicates that Tony Khan might be done entirely with Baker as a talent. Here's the quote. Britt Baker might be done with AEW. At least the feeling I'm getting from talking to people in AEW is Tony Khan might have her in the same category as some other wrestlers where they just don't get phone calls and don't get called in to show up. The Rusev effect, in that case, I guess. There is a lot of frustration with her, I'm told, and I've heard this pretty consistently. She's wildly unpopular in the women's locker room. One person said no one ever wants to see her come back. Speaking of the women's locker room, now that is a bold, broad statement, and I'll go through a bit quicker. I'm just telling you somebody's perception is nobody wants her back. That's how bad it is that somebody's willing to tell me that. Keller also made mention of people throwing up their hands with the MJF situation, if you remember, back in late July. For those who don't remember, Maxwell Jacob Friedman and Britt Baker had got involved in a confrontation backstage at AEW Dynamite episode 250, Wednesday, July 27th. The situation began after Britt Baker was basically trashing MJF and Will Ospreay during their 1 hour marathon match while it was happening in the ring. And then word got back to MJF through his fiancée, Alicia Atout, and Britt Baker allegedly called Atout a stupid fucking bitch and said she was going to get the backstage interviewer kicked out of the women's locker room. Will Ospreay tried to talk Britt down from the ledge, and then MJF, this is all reported, by the way. We don't know if it's happened, but a lot of people seem to report it this way. The MJF then confronted Britt Baker and in frustration punched a wall afterwards. Britt was suspended for a week over this. MJF wasn't suspended, he wasn't punished, but Britt Baker was suspended for an entire week because there was AEW All in Wembley 2, and she was involved in one of the only matches that actually had been promoted for more than 2 weeks. That was her match with Mercedes Moné. So, business comes first, I guess. Around this time, it was revealed that Britt Baker and the universally beloved backstage Adam Cole had split up in real life after being together for quite a few years. Now, Cole's recent on-screen exploits in AEW have amounted to nothing but backstage, and for people who follow him on social media, that he comes across as a very, very likeable guy. So another strike for Baker, I guess, for some. A few months later, after the MJF incident, there was a weird bit on an AEW Dynamite in November where Britt Baker and Serena Deeb had faced off. Now, you'll probably remember this if you watch Storytime with Dutch Mantel or any sort of news, I guess, we all covered it, was that Britt had beaten Penelope Ford in a not very good match, and most people seem to blame Britt for that one as well. And then Serena Deeb comes on the ramp and sort of just faces off with her, I guess, from afar, and then Britt Baker just yells into the camera or shouts loudly into the camera, "Nobody cares, nobody cares, nobody cares, nobody cares." I suspect that was an audible on Britt Baker's part, because who in their right mind, well, you never know, but who in their right mind would actually book for a future match for someone to say nobody cares? Because, I mean, if the people don't care, why should the fans care, I guess? I mean, especially since Britt had already beaten Serena Deeb recently before then as well. So this had all happened in the last few months, and it's all sort of building up to paint an unflattering picture of Britt. Sean Ross Sapp last year alluded that Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker, who were once good friends and even tagged together before Baker ended up on the sidelines, had somehow fallen out in the intervening time period when I guess Britt was away, and then were now not on good terms. And I think the original idea was for them two to feud over a belt or not, who knows. But anyway, the quote that Sean Ross Sapp said was, "I feel like that ship has sailed interpersonally for those two." That's not the only issue that Britt has with another person in AEW, because there was also herself and Thunder Rosa genuinely hating each other, especially with Baker calling out Thunder Rosa for not fulfilling her responsibilities as AEW Women's Champion. Thunder Rosa had to vacate the belt due to a back injury, but when she was allowed to, she flew for non-AEW, or at least non-wrestling projects that she was involved in, and somehow in Britt's mind, flying is equated to the exact same thing as taking bumps in a ring, and Britt felt that she should have worked while injured, or worked through the injury, or whatever it is. Now, it's well known that the AEW locker room can be a bit cliquey and a less than welcoming atmosphere for some, and I think a lot of people have partially ascribed that to Britt Baker, at least on the women's side of things, and even, with MJF, I guess it's bleeding into the men's side of things, like Mean Girls, I guess. So much to the point that in 2023, Lufisto, if you remember that name, and some of the women arranged a meeting with Tony Khan to discuss Britt Baker and her cadre, or the cabal of friends, however you want to put it. And somehow this got to Britt's attention, and the story goes, according to Lufisto, who actually made this public on Twitter, was that Tony Khan immediately took the side of Britt and got rid of Lufisto, and never had the meeting to discuss Britt Baker's behavioural problems, as it were, let's say. And then there was also one of the original rumours about Britt, was that, and this has already been rebutted by Cody Rhodes, so take it for what it's worth. Aside from butting heads with the other EVPs over creative direction, and maybe Tony Khan as well, and fans turning on Cody towards the end, if you remember that, he was getting a lot of boos, and probably money as well, because it's always about money, is that Brandy Rhodes and Britt Baker were not getting along in the women's locker room. And once again, that report was originally fired by Wade Keller, so who knows what's true. I'm merely repeating it. But even if 50% of what's been reported, of what I've just said there over the past couple of years, is true, that's probable cause for her to fall out of favour with Tony Khan. And look, I've had businesses, I've had to hire and fire people in my early 20s. I don't know what, given that position of power. But, I mean, if someone was constantly an issue where you walked into work every single week and it's like, oh, God, what's it going to be this week? Is there going to be a problem with so-and-so? You'd very quickly think of a way to get rid of them. Now, here's the biggest issue at the moment, is that Britt's wrestling, while being so-so before her prolonged absence, is just downright bad in 2024. She had not only a stinker, but an extended stinker. It was nearly 20 minutes long with Mercedes Moné at the previously mentioned AEW All in Wembley, and even a final match on AEW television with Penelope Ford was not very good, and a lot of people ascribed it to Britt Baker not doing well and Penelope Ford carrying the match. Why would Tony Khan want to put the full promotional weight behind Britt Baker, who is apparently difficult to work with, who's putting on crappy matches, when there's now the highest paid woman in wrestling, currently, we think, or at least one of, Mercedes Moné, on the roster? So, I mean, you pay someone that much, you have to get a value out of them, so that is going to be your new sort of cash cow, as it were, potentially, or at least try and mitigate the losses, as well as all-round better performers like, Jamie Hayter, Mariah May, Tony Storm, Willow Nightingale, Akira Shida, Chris Statlander, more who've proven that they can carry the women's division just fine in her absence. It reminds me of the Tessa Blanchard thing. At the most recent TNA pay-per-view this past weekend, Tessa Blanchard made her in-ring return against Jordan Grace, and when she won, I'm pretty sure she won, fans chanted, "She's a racist" at her. At some point, there just becomes too many stories and accusations that are made public by people who you would trust their opinions of, in Tessa's case, like Chelsea Green and people, that it becomes harder and harder for fans to ignore. And unlike, say, Shawn Michaels, Britt is not a great wrestler or a big draw, despite at one point, up until a couple of years ago, being one of the franchise players in AEW. So ultimately, if it was true, you put up, Vince did in the 90s, Vince McMahon, with Shawn Michaels, because he was arguably the best wrestler on the roster. He was a main eventer in the mid-90s. He was the heir apparent. You put up with the bad attitude because you get so much out of him in the ring. With Britt Baker, she's barely there, not putting on good matches, and a bad influence in the locker room, allegedly. Here's one more thing, a quote from Wade Keller once again. I am told that the Adam Cole situation is not stopping her. There should be no heat on Adam Cole. He has nothing to do with her not being on television. Obviously, she said had some standout moments in AEW and became a star and was seen as a centerpiece act. But even back then, I was hearing about her reputation and being unpopular in certain circles and difficult to work with and being fiercely territorial of her role in the company in a way that just felt unsustainable. And from what this is Wade, Keller's hearing, at least the attitude right now at the moment, the belief is Tony Khan is fed up enough that he's just going to focus his TV time on others. I don't know what that means in terms of her pay and her contract, and it's possible eventually things will change. At this point in asking around, you should not expect to see her back imminently. So, having said all that, do you think we are going to see Britt Baker back on television? Because this report's come out, I read it today. It might have come out last night for all I know, but I read it today. So do you think, I mean, it's not even beyond Tony Khan to just say, well, you think Britt Baker's not going to be on television? Here she is, and then do that. But for the most part, maybe it seems to be right, because I think after so long, with so many reports of bad behavior, and these are just the ones that make it out, that you just grow exhausted with somebody and then you just move on. And it's as simple as that. That is, of course, assuming all this is true, which I constantly harp on about because it's wrestling, quote-unquote, journalism, and basically it's a bunch of hearsay and you never know where the source is coming from. So there you go. Do you think we are going to find Britt Baker back on AEW television in 2025? Do you think Tony Khan is just going to freeze her out for the remainder of her contract and get rid of her at the end? Let us know. And in fact, will you miss her if you don't see her again? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you in the next video.